Welcome back to the Michael Brooks Show. Jam-packed evening. Joining us now is the legend himself. Pleasure to have him back, Professor Richard Wolff. Thank you, Professor Wolff, for returning.
Glad to be here.
How are you?
Tired.
Oh, well, we'll energize. Well, let me. You know what we could do is let's take a.
Sorry. That shows you how tired I am.
Oh my gosh. We'll start. You know what we're gonna do? We're going to start, because you know I always like to do this because I'm an instigator. We're going to do a brief gem segment with David Griscom, and then you will give your review and see if he's improved. Let's get started.
He did well last time. So.
Well, you've graded him very generously. What you say off mic is much sharper. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, you know, I just want to take a second and really shout out Shama Sawant for
Yes.
her victory in Amazon. I mean, that was an absolutely huge victory, not just for the people of Seattle, but really to show Amazon that they're not going to be able to push around our democracy. And, you know, we're seeing this is going to be more and more of the chapter of the next few years. Tech controls our data, our online experience, and more they're fighting to take control of our democracy. And what we're seeing now, they're also trying to take control of our cities. Let us not forget the fact that what Amazon was trying to fight against when it came to Sawant and the City Council of Seattle was trying to prevent them from being able to build homeless shelters in the city that desperately needs it because of the unequal system that in large parts companies like Amazon have created there. Now we're also seeing in Toronto, Sidewalk Labs, which is owned by Google, is planning to build the first smart city. And this is going to be a city that's going to have, it's an area of Toronto, it's their waterfront district, that's going to have cameras everywhere. It's going to track everyone's movements and get immense amounts of personal and private data of individuals in order to create an efficient city, right? So we're seeing this, and it's absolutely frightening when you realize the data practices of these corporations, that these are people are being invited into our city planning. Now, there's a housing crisis all across the country as well. And we've seen recently in the past few months that Facebook, Apple, Google, Amazon, and Microsoft have all pledged money in some way to help the housing crisis. Now, you know, there's some things that could possibly be good from this, but what we're seeing is that, for example, Facebook is, promising to subsidize some rents. They're going to open up their land to be able to create affordable housing, the terms of which are not very clear yet. And what we're going to be seeing is that, do we want a corporation like Facebook to be able to decide what people's rents are subsidized and which ones aren't? It's the dual role of these corporations that own so much land in these areas that they want to be able to have some base of workers, but they also want to make sure that the land holdings that they have increase in value. So when we're talking about a corporation like Facebook or Apple subsidizing housing costs, that actually won't do much to keep rents in the surrounding area lower. It will just allow them to have some workers on their properties, be able to afford to live there. So this is a big question that we're going to have to deal with. And let's also not forget the fact that so much of our rental units in the United States are owned by a few massive real estate holding corporations that their number one goal is to extract profits, to give in large part to a lot of international bourgeoisie who are trying to park their money in the United States housing market because it has such high returns and is continuing to grow and become more and more exploitative for the average worker who, across the board, Americans are rent burdened and they can't afford to live anywhere in the United States on an average working class salary. So we absolutely need national rent control, and we need to embolden cities to go further. We need investment in beautiful green public housing across the country. We need to tax empty units and not allow people to hold empty apartment units in cities that desperately need housing.
That would really interfere with money laundering, David. I'd like
That's
you to
very
be a little
true.
bit fair.
Yeah. And we absolutely, we need to break up as we move to decommodifying housing in general, these massive real estate corporations that are able to hold such outsized power and influence over our lives. We need to modernize our cities. People are faced with two choices. One is going to be dominated by tech interests, the financial elite, and a few rich billionaires, and the other could be a radical, democratic, socialist future that ensures that every single person is able to house themselves and live in their communities and live in the places that they work.
Terrific. Well, an A from me, David. But Professor Wolff?
Same.
Wow. That's a breakthrough.
Can I add a couple things?
Yes, please.
Well, the old joke about socialists wanting the government to plan things. It's not the kind of socialism that makes sense to me, but I understand it. For a long time it was. That's what socialism meant. And just imagine if you had allowed socialist government planning. You understood that the population was growing at a certain rate, that it was moving around the country because of where industry was located. And you made a decision to build, imagine this, ahead of the need, to make sure that you built housing where people and jobs were going. If one part of the country was losing population, losing jobs, and people were moving, well, you would build housing, again, imagine it, ahead, so that as the people got needy, you had an apartment. We don't do that in the United States. We rely on the market. But I can tell you about a country famous for building apartments ahead of the need. It's called the People's Republic of China. And regularly, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal make fun of the fact that they have big blocks of apartments that are empty, whole cities that are unoccupied. Ha ha, see how crazy they are? No, they're not. They're planning ahead, which they can do with their system, and we can't. And the result is we have people who can't afford it. We have the lunatic arrangement of wealthy people gentrifying, and then discovering that the people they want to take out the dog and clean the thing and be the nanny have to travel 2 hours from some place where they can afford, which makes no sense and is inefficient. The market is inefficient. Capitalist markets have always been inefficient, except for the professors who pretend that it is efficient. The joke is that the Chinese building ahead, it's a much saner arrangement, gives people a lot of work, and avoids 90% of the chaotic way that we do it. Capitalism, a history of urban slums coexisting with wildly rich mansion. There's no planning. There's nothing remotely like equity. And we're just seeing the latest phase of it with this. You can't have housing unless that's your goal, that's your project, and you want to give people a way to live. You have to then coordinate two things. It's not rocket science. The people have to earn enough money, and the prices of housing have to be such that they'll have enough money to buy the house. A system that can't do that is not an efficient system. Ours isn't, because we have a disconnect between the prices of the housing and the incomes of most of the people, producing the absurdity of homelessness alongside of empty apartments all over the country. You could not have a more staggering condemnation of how capitalism handles the housing problem than that.
Do you remember when Jeremy Corbyn caused a big stir by suggesting that there was a mismatch between the homelessness crisis in London and people's second homes and apartments that they don't even occupy? Right. And that was considered to be a great scandal that he actually suggested. Looks like there's a need. Looks like there's a meeting of the need. Right. And they said he was Stalin. Actually, Boris Johnson compared him to Stalin just the other day.
Let alone is it surprising that cities like London, New York, and San Francisco that are very tied into the international finance market are the ones that really face like the worst of this inequity when it comes to housing.
Right.
It's famous if you talk to your realtors in Manhattan. Once it's dark, if you walk along Fifth Avenue, say from in the 30s all the way down to Washington Square Park, you will see that the overwhelming majority on any given day of windows are dark. There's nobody in there. And if you go in and you talk to the doorman that sits in the front of many of these buildings, they will gladly, just chat with you. You're a reporter or something. They will tell you, this apartment, this is owned by somebody in make up a country, and he's very wealthy, and he keeps this apartment. And 2 or 3 times a year, his nieces or his uncle or his wife come to New York for a lovely week of shopping. And how fun it is that they stay in their apartment during that week. And then several months go by and somebody else. That's it. That's what these apartments are. And, there's no... It's like, I remember I went to school at Yale in New Haven, and they had a homeless problem. And I once made a proposal for 6 months out of the year at least. All the Yale dorms are empty. huge collection of beautifully prepared apartments, often empty because the students take their stuff home at the end of the year or the summer. You could do all kinds of creative things. The Yale people were beside themselves. Just the idea that they should share something. That's what you say on Sunday at the chapel. Right. It's not what you do.
Do you think that myth of capitalist efficiency is waning? In other words, there's the raw power of capital, which is as powerful as ever, but the broad, I mean, we talked about Gramsci a couple months ago, and I've talked about it, but the hegemony, the actual belief in it, the discourse of it is loosening and weakening a bit.
Yeah. But as an idea, efficiency, and every time I try to explain this, I lose a few people, so I got to be careful here. The idea of efficiency is itself absurd.
Right.
Let me try to explain. In economics, we teach, and I have had to do that in my life, biting my tongue at every stage, but I had to teach something called cost-benefit analysis, which is really the same thing. You assess the efficiency of some proposed project, adding a wing to the hospital, rerouting the highway over there, investing in this, whatever. And you're supposed to then look at all the positive things that will come out of it and all the negative ones. And then you measure the positive ones and you measure the negative ones. And if the positive outweigh the negative, well, it's a go. Because that's efficient. It's got more positives than negatives. And if you're comparing two alternatives, same game. You compare the net positives in the one against the other, and you go with whichever the net positive is bigger, right? It's a nice rule. Students can take notes and vomit it all back on the exam. But that's what we call education, and so that's what we do. But I'm a mathematician. Before I did economics, I did mathematics. So let me tell you what's wrong with this lovely story. Number one, all the positive effects, first problem, many of them don't show up for time, for a month, for a year. Therefore, unless you can read the future, which nobody can, you don't know what the positives are. You have no way to identify them, let alone measure them. And the same applies to the negatives. So the project of counting them all up, that's a fantasy. You can't do that. Nobody can do that because they're in the future, which we're not at yet. So the idea is nuts, number one. But that's only half. Here comes the second nuts. The second nut's even worse than the first one.
Yes.
We identify a positive outcome, problem. We know the outcome, but we can't allocate the causality of that outcome to only the thing we're measuring. In other words, the outcome of building a thing over there is X. But X was caused by 50,000 other things, which we don't know. We're all playing a role. The temperature was different. The winds were different. This person car veered. You can't do it because the things you're measuring are not the products only of what you're measuring. So not only can't you get the pluses and minuses, but you can't isolate how much of what you're looking at was the cause versus other things that you're not including. When you put it all together, you can't measure the positives or the negatives. Therefore, subtracting an unknowable number from another unknowable number puts you in the land of cuckoo. There is no such, the efficiency of something is unknown. The only reason this idea was developed was that people had an anxiety. And here's the anxiety. We have to make a decision. Are we going to build that hospital wing or not? Are we going to reroute the highway or not? Are we going to I understand. The decision has to be made. And the anxiety was, oh my God, I have a little bit of information, but I may make a wrong decision. And then I'll be in the soup. So what I need is a metric that I can point to and that everybody will recognize is valid to say, see, I did my homework, I looked at the efficiency calculus, and it said go. So don't get angry at me. It's fakery. It's total total fakery.
Is this the Freud part of Marx plus Freud equals truth?
It's more than mathematics.
No, but I'm talking about the anxiety.
Yes.
The anxiety part that says, okay, I just have to actually make a decision, but I need to create a story to mask my anxiety and have an escape route. Does that idea
It's
get
like
even...
you're right. It is psychological because think of it. Am I going to go out with her? Is it going to work out? The answer is you don't know. You don't. You make a reasonable guess, but then you go and we all do it. Well, if I cross the street, will a truck hit me? Well, it might, but but to say to me, I know I can cross the street because I've done it. That's it. Allies your anxiety because you know there's a risk.
Right.
Look, it is. It's religious. You know what it is? It's that when my body dies. No, that's too scary. I don't die. A part of me takes off. It's called my soul. It goes right upstairs, and it sits with the angels next to God's left hand. Okay. This allies anxiety. It has nothing to do with anything other than it's the little child in us. It's the little 2-year-old who, before he or she goes to sleep, wants mommy or daddy to read them a story. The details of the story are not what's important, whether the piggies got blown away by the wolf or not. It's an allying of anxiety. It's mommy being there with that beautiful voice putting you to sleep, or daddy telling you a story, the details of which you could care less. It's the event. It's the cathartic allocation of, how should I put it, peacefulness that you need, because the world is scary in this
That's
moment.
the phrase we always use, Matt. We always say
Bedtime stories?
We always say that's a bedtime story.
Yes.
We use that all the time on the show.
That's what they all are. They're all bedtime stories.
And does that bedtime story get even more dangerous when you're doing a cost-benefit analysis that says the entire global ecosystem is an externality?
That's right. Crazy. And then, that you could get away with that, I mean, it's just, I drove my car into your driveway. That I happened to run over you in the process. It's an externality. I was interested in getting my car in the garage. I'm really sorry this happened to you. I got nothing to do with this. Look at me. I'm as innocent as a newborn. I'm aiming my car in the garage. Why you happen to be lying there eating a sandwich has nothing to do with me.
You just watched a Michael Brooks show video. Subscribe to get them all. Why wouldn't you? Don't be foolish. Click subscribe below and become a patron as well. Patreon.com/TMBS. Thanks, everybody.